It's going to be one. Thank you for recording, Michelle. This will be one of 4 sessions. So this is the first Friday, and it'll be the next consecutive 3 Fridays after at 10 a.m. So thank you for attending. Please try to attend all 4 so that way you'll be well versed in the RPA. But rest assured, if you did not attend one and want to catch up for in between the 4 sessions, they will be recorded. Okay. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Michelle, and you can go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Won't let me minimize. Hold on, we have a little bit of a technical difficulty. Okay, so we're all situated. Okay, welcome everybody to the California Residential Purchase Agreement and Joint Escrow Training today. As you know, they've made some changes at the end of last year, and we will be going over pages 1 through 3, which we call the grid section. There's a lot of good improvements in this contract that makes it easier for us not to miss things. Because everything is up front. So your fillable sections are going to be mainly on pages 1 through 3. In the next session, you'll see page 4 with included and excluded items will be fillable as well. But most of your fillables boxes are on page 1 through 3. So let's get started. So we're starting right in the contract. As you know, there would be an agency disclosure attached to this. Today, we're just focusing on the contract. We can do disclosures another day. So this is going to look familiar. The date you prepare the offer, insert that date. Offer from your buyer, property acquired, put the address in, the city, the county, the zip code, and the APN number, assessor's parcel number is inserted here. And you notice this new form, we have a lot longer line to put those assessor parcel numbers in, because sometimes there's more than one.
Michelle,
Yes,
can you share your screen?
We don't have the screen, no.
it is shared.
No,
It's not there.
Okay,
No, it's not yet.
okay.
Show her how to do it, Edgar.
Yeah, so
What happened?
hold on. You grab this. And then
Yeah, but it was, you said if it's up on the screen, it's shared, right?
yeah. Sure.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about
there
that,
you
folks.
go.
I didn't realize it wasn't up.
Yeah.
I could see it here, but I guess you couldn't see it. So we'll start at the top. So you're gonna insert your date prepared here. That is the actual date that you're typing up the offer. And it's an offer from your buyer. Insert the property address, the city, the county, the zip code, and the assessor's parcel number goes here. If there's multiple assessor parcel numbers tied to that property, please cover them all here. They left a long line now for us to be able to do that. So the agency disclosure, of course, you've each provided your clients an agency, an AD form, agency disclosure regarding real estate relationships. You still need to fill out this agency right embedded in the offer. And this is an important section here. So you're going to fill out, and this should look familiar to agents that have been in the business, the seller's brokerage firm, that firm's license number, the seller's agent, their license number, the cooperating brokerage firm would go here, license number, agent, license number. You're going to check that you work for the seller and you are the seller's agent. The buyer is the buyer and the buyer's agent. Now, if this was both Coldwell Banker George Realty with 2 different names, we are dual agent at that point. So if it's 2 different names in the same brokerage under the same broker, you become dual. Okay. So just make sure that you make that distinction. Now, if as a listing agent, when you receive an offer and you notice something in the confirmation is not right, maybe a license number was transposed or something like that, or the brokerage name wasn't spelled out properly, you can correct that, not on a counter offer, but correct it by supplying a AC form. It's confirmation of real estate agency relationships. And you're simply correcting this, and then that form will replace this information so it's all proper. At the end of the training, I'll roll through the forms that I'm talking about here just to show you what they look like. Towards the end of the training, we will pull up all the disclosures and go through them. But if this is wrong, it can't be countered and corrected. You need to perform the correction by supplying an AC form. And it's very simple to fill out. I'll show you at the end of the 3 pages. Okay. So if more than one brokerage is representing a buyer or a seller, you're going to attach the additional broker acknowledgement form right to the offer. So if it's a different broker that is representing the buyer or seller, sometimes that happens where there's a split in the listing, then you're going to attach a CAR form ABA. Okay. So just as with the previous RPA that we had, possible representation of more than one buyer or seller is attached to this form as a default. So it's already attached for you. There's some other forms. We'll go over those. So we're going to get right into the terms and conditions of this contract, this offer. So if you note here, terms and conditions is number 3. So if you were countering a point, because I know this can be a little bit confusing, you would reference it as if we were countering C, it would be 3C, expiration of offer, or 3A, purchase price. So if you want to be in your counter, if you want to reference that, you use 3 and then whatever's the alphabet is here. Okay, now paragraph number, this is referring you to the body of the offer. If you want more information or you want to read more on this term of the contract, it refers you to what paragraph to read. So most of us, if we're going to be making an offer, I really suggest that you print a blank offer form if you're new, or if you're refreshing and haven't been in the business for a while. Print it out, read it, highlight it. You got any questions, we're here to answer those for you, and then you'll be ahead of the game by the time you're ready to make offers for your clients. So here's a fillable box, the purchase price. Fill in your purchase price. And if it's all cash, click the box. Okay, so that's fairly simple. Close of escrow. Here you're going to click the box, and it could be whatever makes sense to your transaction. It could be 30 days, 45, 15, whatever makes sense. If it's a cash offer, a lot of times the days are lower. Or if your client prefers a date because they have a date that is significant to them, or they feel is a good date for them, you can insert a date. Just make sure it's not falling on a holiday or a weekend, but you can insert a date for close as well. The expiration of the offer, it defaults to 3 calendar days after all buyer signatures. So it would be when the last buyer signed, it calculates 3 calendar days. Those are calendar days. So this offer can expire on a legal holiday. It can expire on a weekend. So just bear that in mind. This used to be at the back of the offer. They moved it up front. This grid is very nice for doing that. You can capture everything here and generally not miss it because they put everything up top. And I really like this grid section for that purpose. So the initial deposit, you insert the amount here. It is going to auto calculate the percent of the purchase price here. Okay, so it's going to auto calculate. And as you all know, most of the listing agents are going to be looking for a 3%. Thank you. Welcome, Tina. Denise, thank you for coming in. And so it's going to calculate the percentage. And upon, let's see, I'm sorry, within 3 business days. So you're going to notice the initial deposit is due in escrow in business days. So this is the only box here that is going to say business days. So that means Monday through Friday, excluding holidays. So your initial deposit will be due to escrow within 3 business days after acceptance by wire transfer. Now you can insert here a personal check, money order. However, bear in mind that escrow has the final say on how they need to see that deposit, because sometimes they won't accept a personal check. So even if you put that here, it's really up to escrow to tell you if they can accept it. So it defaults to wire transfer, and if the escrow company is not going to accept a personal check, you'll need to go back to wire transfer. And there is a wire fraud advisory that automatically populates with your offer. So make sure you're going over that with your clients so they understand it. Okay. So the increased deposit on D2, you don't see this a lot in offers, but it's good to go over it a little bit with you. So if you are going to have an increased deposit, you check here. Now these boxes become fillable for you once you've checked that. So you insert the amount and the percent of, it'll calculate automatically. And it defaults on this increased deposit that it's going to occur upon removal of all contingencies, or you can insert a date. Now, if your clients have initialed liquidated damages deeper into this contract, which we'll be training on in the other sessions, then please make sure that you're using a form DID, which is, if I'm looking down, I'm looking at the form names, delivery of increased deposit and liquidated damages addendum. Now, you don't put this on an offer, you don't put it on a counter offer. As they say here, this form is used at the time the deposit is made and you've increased it. And the reason why is you want to, if they have initialed liquidated damages, this form will include this amount into that liquidated damage amount if something went awry on your deal. So it's a 3% cap for residential liquidated damages, or the deposit amount up to only 3%. Okay, so very important. If you're going to increase, make sure that you give the DID form for all parties to sign. So that's included in liquidated damages. As a listing agent, you're probably going to be looking for that. So loan amount, you're going to insert your first here, your loan amount here, and it's going to automatically calculate the purchase price. The interest rate defaults to fixed rate, but if it's an initial adjustable rate, you're going to click here and put the percent not to exceed. These are material facts. If that's the case, make sure you're filling them in. And I like the way this defaults to 0, and so buyer to pay 0 points, or if there are points, make sure you're inserting those here. And then coming over here, this form, this loan automatically defaults to a conventional loan. Okay, so, or if you check FHA or VA, you have a box here to check, a box here. You could also check seller financing or other if you have another way that this will be financed. So for FHA and VA, it's going to automatically populate with the FHA VA a mandatory clause form. So once you check that, it's going to populate, and the HID is for FHA loan only, and that's for your protection, get a home inspection. So if you check these, they will auto populate. So just a little note on FHA VA, the lender can require some repairs. And in addition to that, the mandatory clause form, which is required to be attached on these type of loans, even if your client removed all contingencies, including the appraisal, FHA or VA loans without a mandatory clause leaves that contingency, the appraisal, in effect for the duration of the escrow. So just bear that in mind. That's something to explain to your sellers if you are entertaining FHA VA loan. So I just wanted to point that out quickly, and it'll also note it down here further in the grid. So here, if FHA or VA is checked, deliver a list of lender required repairs. So you have 17 days, or you can toggle it to shorter days if you wish, but I would probably leave it there because you need to get inspections. It's a little bit confusing that it's here, but this would go through the normal process as far as an agent. you would have your buyer select the home inspector, the termite company. They would go and do the inspection. And what's nice on the request for repair, there is a section now that they've added to the request for repair where you can handle asking for lender required FHA or VA repairs. For FHA and VA, if they see, like on FHA, if the appraiser noticed like active termite, they're going to call that out and they're going to ask for a termite report, and that work would need to be done prior to close. VA will require termite work. They're looking for safety issues, like if there was a broken window or something of that nature. So this is things that you would need to explain to your client as a seller's listing agent if you are entertaining FHA or VA loans. So I'll show you on the request for repair how you would handle documenting what FHA or VA is requesting. Now, bear in mind that the seller does not have to agree with those repairs, but if it's a lender requirement, you may want to try to cooperate or do the best you can to negotiate that between the two parties. Because the lender is requesting these repairs. Last year, I did negotiate on a VA loan that they would pay for the termite. And so we had the termite done and the bill was sent in and the buyer paid for it through escrow. So it is possible, but you want to be very cognizant that the lender's requesting it, and you don't want to, if you don't have a bunch of offers coming in or hadn't had, then make sure that you explain and try to negotiate. So additional financed amount, I rarely see this filled in at all, but if you are financing an additional amount, you insert it here, and it's going to calculate the percent of the purchase here, and it defaults to conventional loan. It's just like the other box. You want to, if it's defaults to a fixed rate loan, or if it's an adjustable rate, click the box, insert the percentage. It defaults to 0 points, or if it's not, up to what percentage. So on the occupancy type, this defaults to a primary purchase. So if it's a secondary or investment, make sure you're clicking the appropriate box. It does default to primary. And listing agents, when you're reviewing these offers, it's good to print them, take a highlighter and, highlight all the checked boxes. That's what I do. And I keep my draft copy and highlight everything so I know exactly what was checked and said. Okay. So, and that's to get ready for a counter or just to have it on file. So now we're going to move to page 2. So this is something really nice. In the past, you could see seller to credit buyer X amount for closing costs, and it would be embedded in the contract or 3 or 4 different places. And at times, this particular item was missed, and that's really concerning. So now it's right up front. So seller to credit, if any, to buyer. Now you insert the dollar amount here that you're asking the credit. It's going to calculate the percent. Now you note here, the additional terms is that credit always defaults to closing costs, or there is a box to check other. So if you are asking for a credit, if your buyer has a loan and you're asking for a credit of $10,000 and you insert that here, my advice and the brokerage's advice is please check with your lender, make sure that they can handle this whole $10,000 credit on the loan. Because if, for instance, they got to the closing table and the lender said, oh, we're going to only allow an $8,000 credit, then it's $8,000. So, it would make people feel bad if they thought they were getting 10 and only got 8. So there's an easy way to handle it. Call your lender, ask them how much credit for closing costs, because it defaults to there, can be applied to this loan, and then you're prepared for that. So if it was 10,000 and you negotiated a different way for payment, like 2,000 down on the purchase price, and the lender could handle 8,000 on the credit, then you could do that, but that would have had to been negotiated up front. So the best way is please check with your lender when you're putting a credit in that box, so you make sure that they can handle that amount. Okay, very simple call. So additional finance terms, the training that I've gone through, a couple of them, there's not a lot that you would put in here. But if you have something, it shouldn't be something that's adjusting the price or anything. It maybe you want to put attorney to review offer, which is very rare, within 5 days after acceptance or something of that nature. But there's not really much that would go in there. 90% of the time, it is going to be left blank. But if you have some additional finance term that was not handled above in the grid, please, by all means, insert it there, okay? So that you have everything covered. And they've done such a good job to make it so nice for us to be able to put everything right up front so we don't miss things. So verification of all cash. So that is what we call in the business, you know, the proof of funds. Oh, sorry, I scrolled too quick. Okay, of all cash. So that means not only for the purchase price, but for the closing costs and the whole kit and caboodle. So verification of all cash, proof of funds is what you would want attached to the offer, or you can put 3 days after acceptance or X amount of days. But your offer would be a lot stronger if you attach it. So the verification of all cash, a couple of things, please make sure that the names on that proof of funds match the buyers. We've had verification of all cash come in before, and it didn't match the buyers. In fact, it was somebody else and it was an uncle. But when you're, you know, putting your verification of all cash on these deals, make sure that it is the buyer's proof of funds, and make sure that the date is within the last 30 days. You want a current proof of funds, because the listing agent will surely call you on that or counter it if it's not. So for those having verification of down payment and closing costs, so for the loan clients, you want to make sure the same thing, you have a proof of fund attached, and make sure again the names match, the date is current, and it's much stronger to attach it to the offer. You could certainly check 3 days or X amount of days after acceptance, but most listing agents will probably call you for that, or for sure they're going to counter that you provide that to them back with the signed counter offer, because it's a very important document. Verification of the loan application. You usually attach your pre-approval or pre-qual or fully underwritten pre-approval right to the offer, so that the seller knows that you've already gone through somewhat of a process to get approved for this property. So it's stronger if you attach it. Of course, you could check 3 days or insert days here, but we recommend you attach it, be talking to the lender. And if they've done a deeper dive into the financials of the client, they may have something stronger than a pre-qual, maybe a pre-approval or fully underwritten pre-approval. So talk to the lender, see what's the highest letter you can get. Of course, the best one is the fully underwritten pre-approval if you can get it. But at any rate, be talking to the lender to see where they're at in the process of reviewing that buyer's financials, okay? And get that letter over to you so you can submit it with the offer. The other thing is make sure that, again, the date is within the last 30 or so days. Make sure the amount's right. You don't want to submit a verification letter that is lower than the purchase price and lower than the down payment that they would have. Make sure if you're purchasing, you have the right amount on that letter, okay? Because sometimes, you know, they've used that letter on multiple homes and maybe the amount should change. So be watching for that to, you know, for your client to make their offer look good. So final verification of condition of the property. So this is, and it's called a VP. So at the end, towards the end of escrow, it defaults to 5 days prior to COE. You're going to go back to the property with your buyers and perform a walkthrough. So it's not a contingency, but you do need to perform this, because what you're looking for is to make sure the property was maintained in the same condition as when you made the offer. So for instance, if there was a green front yard, you don't expect to go back and see a dead front yard. You know, the seller should be maintaining that property in the same condition as when the offer was accepted. So it's just stuff like that. So another couple of things that I want to point out, because I've had this happen, you go to the property on your final verification, there's a bunch of trash in the backyard. Even if it's stacked nicely, you know, looks very neat, the new buyer generally does not want to deal with that. You know, they're busy moving in. So listing agents, make sure that you're prepping your seller for how to deliver the property. Make sure that they remove all of their debris. Make sure that they haven't left hazardous material like paint cans, stuff like that, because the new buyer really would prefer not to deal with that unless there's agreement between buyer and seller that they will deal with it. I had that happen, and we paid the buyer $150 to get a truck over there to remove the trash. So please make sure you're preparing your buyers, your sellers, to clear the property. Now, the other thing on the final verification of condition, if you have not already done so, you might want 10 days prior, but at any rate, if you negotiated between buyer and seller that the seller would complete repairs prior to close of escrow, make sure that you have receipts for those repairs and you are checking when you're over there on the VP. I mean, you're not going to be crawling up in the attic, but you can just do a simple ask, make sure that those repairs are done, ask for receipts or whatever. And if it's something that you can easily look at, you know, those are the types of things you look through on the final verification of condition of property. And the other thing is the buyers do need to attend this, but if they decide they don't want to, or they're not around, they can't do it, there's a way to handle that right on the VP. And let me look at the paragraph. It is paragraph 3. You would check that the buyer waives the right to conduct this final investigation. So you would check number 3. If they cannot attend, you check number 3, and it is still going to require all parties to sign. Probably if my buyers couldn't attend, I would probably still go. You know, I can't sign for the buyer, but I could look for the things that I previously mentioned. Okay. So assignment request. Now in this new contract, they've limited the time frame to 17 days by default, or you can insert days here of when a buyer can assign this contract. So if it's a wholly owned entity of the current buyer or their trust, you know, that's no problem. They can do that. At any rate, when there is an assignment request, you want to submit an assignment of agreement addendum. Okay, so it's going to outline in that addendum the steps to take in an assignment request. And one of the things to note as an agent, because it does cause a little bit of extra work, but it's okay. Have all of the documents. If it's the same buyer with a wholly owned entity or trust, of course you don't have to worry about this. But if it's somebody new coming in this assignment request, please make sure that you have all of the documents ready for them to sign and initial, because we want to make sure that they're signing everything, that they've seen it. Now, it doesn't create longer days on the contingency or anything. It's just providing this new person or entity with the documents, and the same contingency periods wherever we're at in the process still apply. Okay, so if you ever have an assignment request and you have any problems filling out the form, or you don't understand it, we're always here to help you. Okay, so now we're moving on down to the loan. The loan contingency defaults to 17 days after acceptance, or if you checked cash up there, it automatically means no loan contingency, but you could check it again if you wish. But 17 days after acceptance, if you are modifying these days for your buyer, make sure you are talking to the lender. Make sure the lender can deliver in the days of your contingencies. Be talking to that lender, make sure. Okay, that goes for the loan and the appraisal. So these are both defaulting to 17 days. Now, the only two contingencies you can remove with a check mark on this RPA is right here, the loan and the appraisal. Okay, and it is right here, it's reminding us that FHA VA does not eliminate appraisal cancellation rights. Okay, so there's another reminder of that. So, but anyway, and here, if you wanted to insert a different price, like if the appraisal comes in low, you want to put a different figure in here, you can go ahead and do that. Just make sure you're explaining to your buyers how much money they're going to need to come in with. You could have escrow run an estimated closing statement, but if you do modify that, normally this is left blank. Make sure this buyers, if you're trying to be highly competitive, understand what they'd need to come in with. So again, the only two contingencies that you can remove directly are no loan and no appraisal. Okay, so investigation of the property. That means that you're going to you're scheduling your home inspection, your termite, what else? If the buyer wants to check with the city, if they want to look around the neighborhood, things of that nature, check Megan's Law database. You don't check it for them, they check it themselves. But anything like that the buyer wishes to perform to make themselves comfortable and to understand the property better, they go ahead and do that during the 17 days. And I know a lot of times agents want this modified down, but there's so much to do. If there's any way you can keep your 17 days, I recommend it, because those days move quickly. And especially if the buyer wants to go to the city and check things and look for permits or anything of that nature, you really kind of need the days. So now informational access to property, they ran it the same days as with the investigation of property. Now, this is not a contingency. What this means is if the buyer wanted to come into the property, maybe they have a contractor that wants to give them a quote on remodeling a kitchen or bathroom, or they want to measure the living room for furniture, anything of that nature is informational access to the property. They may even want to go in, close the window, close the doors, listen to street traffic, but anything that's informational access to the property, 17 days after acceptance, or you can modify those days. And it does not create cancellation rights. And this informational access even applies if contingencies were removed prior to 17 days, okay? Review of seller documents. So those are all of the seller disclosures. So you normally, as a listing agent, you want to get those ready and prepared as soon as possible and out to the buyer. The buyer has 17 days after acceptance to review them, or if you've you can put different days there, or 5 days after receipt, whichever is later. So we as agents never want to be the reason that a contingency was expanded. So we always want to try to get the seller documents complete with the seller and out to the buyer as soon as possible. Preliminary title report, 17 days after acceptance or 5 days after receipt, whichever is later. And on the prelim, when you get it for your buyer, I know that is ordered generally by the listing agent, but make sure as an agent, we're not expert at it, but we have the resources to go to the title officer. We can three-way in our buyer. We can call them and have them explain if there's anything on that prelim that we should be directing our attention towards. In some of the cities around the San Gabriel Valley, I've seen them in Temple City, San Marino, there's some really old HOAs. And while they may not be enforceable, you know, you want to get a copy of those, print them, take a look at them. If your buyer wishes, they can have legal counsel review them. But you want to be looking at the preliminary title report for liens and HOAs that you weren't, you know, aware of, things like that. So I think it's always a good practice to be in the habit, even if the prelim looks clean to you, call the title officer. They're very happy to speak with you. And just what I always say is there anything that I should be paying attention to, you know, on this prelim? And if I notice something, I'll ask them about it if I have questions about it. So always be calling your title officer. They're really happy to speak with you, and then everybody understands. So that's one of the things that I do every time. Common interest disclosures, or HOA disclosures as we call them. You have 17 days after acceptance to review, or 5 days after receipt, whichever is later. Any of us in the business know that we can't make an HOA deliver documents on our time frame. So the best procedure, if you can, as a listing agent, is to get those early. Get them requested. Have the seller pay whatever the fee is. Get those early so that you're not in any problem with receiving them late. We've seen where they've come 20 days later. So you want to be getting those early. Now, as a buyer's agent, there's, you just hope that they're there on time. But at any rate, listing agents, please be ordering those as soon as you can. Review of leased or lien items such as solar or propane tanks, 17 days after acceptance or 5 days after receipt, whichever is later. We did do a class on solar panels. So if those are on the property, even if they're going to, the solar panels will be paid off through escrow by a buyer or seller or something of that nature. There's still at times a contractual obligation with the solar company for buying power, solar power through them. So make sure, listing agents, that you're providing that contract right out the gate. As soon as possible, you can counter it into a counter so they're aware of it. Whatever you need to do, even if you've agreed to pay off the solar panels or something, or water softener or anything, sometimes there's still a contractual obligation with the company that let that contract. So make sure that you are providing that contract of those leased or liened items. If you have one right up top, you want to give the buyer ample opportunity to talk to the solar panel company or whatever company they need to speak with to do their due diligence. Sale of buyer's property. It's not a contingency unless you check the contingent upon buyer purchasing a property form here. So when you print this document out and you're doing your highlights and you see that, go back and review the COP form. It should have automatically attached for you. And the listing agent will be looking to see how you filled that out, okay? So I'm going to come right back up here on this side box, removal or waiver of contingencies. So you can remove any of the contingencies by supplying an attached contingency removal form. But as you see right here, removing removal or waiver of your contingencies at time of offer is against agent advice. So if your client insists on doing that, it's their idea, not yours. You can explain what that means, and they could even ask their legal advisor further. But some people try to come in and remove a lot of contingencies, but make sure that everybody excuse me, understands what that means. Okay, because things, sometimes the seller won't know about things, and if you pull an inspection, the seller might not even been aware of something. So that's kind of tricky. So it is against the agent advice. So that's nice that they covered that there. So possession of the property, time of possession. So this is upon notice of recordation. So either escrow upon notice of recordation, or we're going to come down here to seller occupied. So you can check a different time at 6 p.m. or at 7 p.m. whatever. Okay, so now coming down to seller occupied or vacant units, close of escrow date, or if checked below. So sometimes the seller wants to stay in a little bit longer than close date to get everything situated. So if they're staying 29 days or fewer, you would check here, and well, you won't know this, excuse me. The buyer's agent may not know about the seller occupied, okay, or vacant units. If the listing agent has communicated to you that they really need this time and you want to make a cleaner offer, you can go ahead and insert that. But make sure that you're attaching for 29 days or fewer the SIP form, which is seller to remain in possession. If it's going to be 30 days or more, here you're going to attach, they would need to provide you with a residential lease after the sale. Now, why are these documents important? And buyer's agents, like I said, you may not know until they counter you that that's what they intend to do. Now, the reason they're very important is because the buyer may think, hey, I want some per diem for that day, but the seller may have in their mind they don't want per diem. So you really want these forms to see what the expectations of the clients are. So get these out. Listing agents, if you're countering something like this where they want to stay in the property, make sure that you're supplying the appropriate form, be it the SIP or LAS, so that everybody understands what terms the seller is expecting and if the buyer will cooperate with that. So tenant occupied units, this is for 1 to 4. If it's a tenant occupied unit, you supply the TOPA form. Again, you may not know this. If it's an SFR, a single family residence, you may not know that they have a renter in a bedroom, or you may not know that grandpa or uncle is staying in a bedroom for free. This TOPA form, by the way, does apply whether you're paying rent or not. It's a very nice protection, and I'm grabbing the form here, excuse my look down. It's a very nice protection for everybody. So because it says that the tenant, one of the boxes is the tenant remains in possession under their current leases or the property to be delivered vacant. Well, sometimes that's hard because tenants don't want to, move, but most of the time they'll cooperate. But it also has a clause in there that the seller will make every attempt that they can, a reasonable attempt to have the tenant vacate. And if they choose not to, then the buyer has the right to cancel the agreement, receive their initial deposit back, and any other costs like an appraisal or fee or inspection fee. So, but this TOPA form is really nice because it protects us, especially a buyer if they're expecting something to be delivered vacant and it's not. And if you do use this form, or you need to use it, make sure that you're reading and checking the appropriate boxes. If you need any help, we're here to help you with any of the forms or anything on the contract. Okay. So seller delivery of documents, the time for performance. The seller should have, excuse me, I got to get my water. Seller should deliver the documents within 7 days after acceptance. So it's good to have everything done as much as possible ahead of time and deliver those to the buyer's agent so that they have, the buyer has time to get those done within the review done within your contingency periods. Sign and return escrow holder provisions and instructions. They're asking in the contract, and I think it's a good idea because we want to keep moving on everything. Sign and return those escrow holder provisions and instructions within 5 days after receipt. If you are representing a buyer or seller, you can ask your escrow officer to have the client sign these escrow instructions and go over them with them. Okay, so if you're more comfortable with your escrow officer going over the escrow instructions with them, you can certainly do that. That's up to you. The escrow officers are happy to do that. You can do it on a phone call. They can do it in person. You can attend with your buyer or seller. But if you prefer the escrow officer goes over the escrow instructions with them, then they're happy to do that for you. Time for paying fees and ordering HOA documents. You notice right here, it's just 3 days after acceptance. They made it a very short time frame. Hopefully you have it, sooner than that, because like I said, it could take some time. And here, installing smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, water heater bracing. Even if you're selling a property as is, these are required in our state. So even an as is property, needs to have these things done. You have 7 days after acceptance to complete that. These are negotiable items. It could be a seller or buyer expense. However, it's generally going to be a seller because they have access to the property. Now, seller, if you agreed to have these devices installed and the bracing complete, and an appraiser comes and they're not, the appraiser may have to come back and do a reinspection to make sure that's done. And that sometimes can cost money, 75, 150, whatever. So please make sure this is done, because if you agreed to it, seller, and you didn't do it, and the appraiser had to come back and they were charging a reinspection fee, then that would be the responsibility of the seller to pay for that. Just to give you a little tidbit on that. Evidence of representative authority, or there's a form called representative capacity, 3 days after acceptance. But what's nice about this new offer that I really love is on page 16, they've put that representative authority there. So if you fill that out, you've already done that step. If not, there is an individual form that you can fill out later and provide. And bear in mind that if your buyer is signing for a trust or an entity, of course, escrow will be asking for some documentation on that trust or entity. So just have your buyer aware of that. So here you see O, and there's an I up there I didn't point out earlier, but O is intentionally left blank. I and O, and the reason is because these could be misconstrued as something else. I like a 1 or a 0 for O. So those are intentionally left blank so that there's no confusion on those. Okay. So now we're coming down to page 3 of the grid, and this is the final page of the grid, and it's really exciting because they've done something new here. Okay, so P1. Okay, so this is items that are included in the sale with the property, and items specified in paragraph 9 are included, and the following if checked. So the only pre-checked item in this section is the bathroom mirrors, unless you've excluded them. But here, that could be bathroom mirrors hanging on a chain, mounted to the wall or not. But if there is a bathroom mirror in that bathroom, leave it there unless unless you want to exclude it. Maybe the buyer doesn't like the mirror hanging from a ceiling. I don't know. But at any rate, that is only the only pre-check. So agents, both on the listing and buyer side, please get familiar with paragraph 9, because for listing agents, you want to show the seller these items that are embedded in the contract and already included. So there's one thing that can cause confusion. If you have beautiful drapes, and actually I went through this a while ago, the drapes were beautiful. They also had window coverings under the drapes, but the seller removed all the drapes and the buyer wanted the drapes. So contractually, which a lot of people don't know, and thank goodness we got the drapes back and installed, is the drapes are included in paragraph 9. Now, if it's something that the seller does not want to include, buyers agents and sellers agents should both be going over this contract so you can include or exclude items that you don't wish to include in the sale. Here, potted trees and shrubs. I have had people like wanting a potted plant that they thought they were going to get, and it was a beautiful pot and the seller took it. So if you want any of that included, make sure, even in paragraph 9, they're including light bulbs, smart bulbs. So there's a lot of things that are already included in the sale, and listing agents, if you want to counter any of that out, be very familiar with that paragraph, counter out things that you do not want to include. If you have a stager and they have put curtains up or anything, or hung mirrors in the bathrooms to make it look prettier, make sure that those are excluded, because the buyer would assume those are theirs. So just be mindful of paragraph 9. And then for the automatically excluded items, you would look at paragraph 9C, 9B for the included items. So be familiar with those two paragraphs and you won't have any problems. If you see a fountain in the front, like a set-in or something, I would probably, if I wanted it, put, you know, water fountain, one that's not attached to the ground. Like if there's anything fancy that you want, that's not, that you don't see it listed in 9B, you know, add it here. Make sure that you're going over this with your buyer so that you're including everything that they're expecting, and make sure listing agents to exclude staging items. Okay. So now we're down to the allocation of costs. So you see here, we have buyer, seller, and both. Both means 50-50. Okay, so just bear that in mind on all of these when you're going through it. So natural hazard zone disclosure report, or the NHD as we call it, is required on these transactions. So normally it is negotiable, but however, most of the time the seller is going to pay for it. Buyer's agents are going to check for the seller. You can check the box here and have your provider, whoever you wish to provide that report, here as the buyer's agent. I always check environmental, I check other, and I put taxes, because the NHD report, you can get some additional information, and it could be very helpful to your buyer. So I always check for the additional. I know that one of the NHD providers that I use, it's only $15 or $20 more to get these extra reports. So I always check for those because I like to give the buyer as much as I can. Okay, so here you have blanks where you can insert reports and who's going to pay for it. So some people I've seen, they're going to put in home inspection report and they're going to put the buyer pays. Some agents will put in termite report, seller pays. Now, just a note on termite. The request for repair now has check boxes where you can ask for section 1 and section 2, because the report, fine, it's usually free for a seller to obtain. But if you're asking in your offer for section 1 termite, and the buyer seller doesn't know what that would cost, it's kind of like a blank check. So a lot of times they wouldn't be wanting to sign that unless they already have a report and they know the cost of it. So the request for repair now includes a section where you can ask for section 1 or section 2 to be paid for. And that's a nice inclusion in the request for repair. So a lot of times agents, if they want to come out, you know, really strong, they're not putting in the termite. And secondly, a buyer's agent understands that if the seller doesn't already have that report, they really don't know the cost of it. Okay. Yes.
Does this class go to 11 o'clock or past 11 o'clock?
It should go till about 11:10.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have to leave. I have a meeting now.
Okay. And then smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detector, water heater bracing. Again, it's negotiable. If you're representing the buyer and it's easier for the seller just to have those installed, click here. And that is required, as I said, even if it's as is, okay? So government required point of sale inspections and government required point of sale corrective remedial actions. Please, buyer's agent, don't leave this blank. I just went through a training with the car attorneys and they're recommending do not leave it blank. Check it to the seller, because sometimes buyer, but generally if you're representing the buyer, you're going to check to the seller. Now, why? Because you may not know if there's a point of sale required. You can be checking with the city in the meantime, but in your initial offer, you would check to the seller, because if it's not required, no harm, no foul. Nobody's going to be paying for that fee, but please don't leave these blank. Check a box. Buyer, seller, or both. Generally, a buyer's agent is going to check to the seller. Listing agents, make sure that you understand the city you're in. If there's any requirements, you can go to the city counter. You can call the city. You can look on websites. Some title companies will provide updated lists of what cities are require inspections. I think we have one in-house here. For instance, San Marino does have a requirement for point of sale inspections. Long Beach has a requirement on certain properties in impacted parking areas that the city will come out in certain areas on a map to inspect that there's off-street parking. So the easiest way for listing agents is to make sure you're calling the city, checking websites, or going to the city counter, okay? But buyer's agent, please don't leave this blank. Normally, you're going to check to the seller. Escrow fees, you have 4 choices here. Buyer, seller, both, each to pay their own. So it's not normally 50-50 for escrow fees. Is usually we check each to pay their own customary fees. Of course, it is negotiable, but this is standard where we usually check that each are going to pay their own fees. Escrow holder, if you want to check an escrow company or type in one, you can type it in. I recommend if you think, if you're requesting an escrow company and you have a certain officer in mind, make sure you're not only putting the escrow company, but the officer's name. Maybe the other agent knows that escrow company too and prefers another officer. So if you're asking, ask all the way, ask for the escrow company and the officer. If you are leaving it as the seller's option, put seller's preference. There is an escrow company, which one of our vendors told us, named seller's choice. So don't call it that, call it seller's preference here, okay? So owner's title and insurance policy. This would be normally when you're representing the buyer, you're going to click it to the seller. So owner's title insurance policy, check the seller. Again, over here, if you have a title preference, you can insert that here and put your rep's name, or it could be seller's preference. Now, if you have a lender, if this is a loan, you're going to see right here where it says buyer's lender title insurance policy. It defaults that the buyer pays for that portion. The lender is going to require it, and it is a buyer's cost. Okay, so moving on down to taxes, and please don't leave these blank again. County transfer taxes, city transfer fees, just check if you're representing the buyer. These are negotiable, but most buyer's agents are going to check for the seller. Okay, so HOA fee for preparing disclosures, that is required that the seller pay for that fee to provide the disclosures. Now, if there's an HOA certification fee, that is requested by the lender, usually for the buyer, so that defaults automatically to the buyer. If there's any transfer fees, it is negotiable. You can either click it to buyer, seller, or both. Now, if there is a separate statement that separates an HOA move-in or move-out fee, the seller would pay for their separately documented move-out fee, and the buyer would pay for their separate move-in fee. And that applies only if it's separately billed or itemized with a with the cost transfer fee. Okay, so private transfer fees, this automatically checks to the seller. So generally, we're not going to amend that at all as a buyer's agent. Let's see, fees and costs here. CBGR compliance fee, you can type that right in here and check for the buyer to pay. So CBGR compliance fee. Home warranty plan right here. So usually the buyer's agent is going to ask the seller to pay. It is a negotiable item, but at any rate, if you ask for it, you're going to check the appropriate box, seller. Now, not to exceed, cost not to exceed. Please make sure that you're checking with your provider, whoever you want it issued by, to make sure that your cost not to exceed is enough money for what they're going to order. So if you put in 500 and what they order is 700, the buyer would need to pay the rest, because if you check the seller box, they're only going to pay this. So don't leave this blank. Okay, when you're requesting this, make sure you're filling in an amount, because a listing agent is going to counter that. They want to see a figure in there. They don't want that just open like that. Okay, so you can select your provider who you would want the home warranty plan issued by. Now you see an extra box here. if the buyer is waiving that home warranty plan, you can click this box. Okay, so you can click that box. We do recommend a home warranty plan. Sometimes it can save headaches for people. Now, coming down to the other terms right here. If you can think of any other terms, like a couple of them that I can think of off the top of my head, if one of the buyers is a licensed real estate agent, please be noting that here. You can put buyer A has a, California real estate license, but something like that. Or maybe there's 1031 exchange involved. There are forms for that, but you may want to note that here as well. So right now that concludes the first 3 pages of the grid. I want to mention one other thing. If you have a tight escrow of 10 days, for instance, and all of the contingencies are 17 days by default, make sure you're amending the contingency days to make sense with your transaction. I have seen it where people have forgot to do that, and there's 17 days contingency for a 10-day escrow. So make sure that you're amending that. And another thing is insurability of the property is an important factor in a loan. So when you are in your loan contingency, make sure you're talking to your insurance agent regarding the insurability of the property. Get all that situated within your time frame of your contingency period, because you don't want to get down the road after you've removed contingencies and find out there's some issue insuring the property. So those are the things I recommend you do that right up front. And actually this can be very fun because the more we know, and I'm growing every day, learning and reading, the more we grow and learn, the more confident we feel in these transactions. And the other thing that I always like to say during these training, at Coldwell Banker George Realty, you are never alone in a deal. We are here for you. We can answer your questions. We can advise you. So the brokerage is here for you. You are never alone. We can explain any form to you. We can explain the offer. So I hope that this has been helpful to you. And what I would like to do is open it for questions and for Peter Cam's comments.
Hi, Michelle. Jeffrey, I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, can you specify or give example of the pitfalls of contingency removal? Can you qualify more on that contingency removal pitfalls?
Okay, so the contingency removal form, I can go over that. We did a class on that, and I think I have a recording. What specifically would you like to know about the contingency form? Because what you're going to do is you're going to notice that the contingency removal form, it has sections to it. Okay, there's many sections. Let me look. There's probably 10 different sections that you can remove contingencies. So sometimes all you're going to be removing is a loan contingency or the investigation contingency. So you can remove contingencies in step. So contingency removal would be number 1. You want to try to stay within your time frames of your contingency days, but you can remove them by step. But most of the time you're going to remove all contingencies, especially when you do a request for repair. Normally the listing agent is going to answer and respond and say, the seller agrees to these items, providing you send a buyer removal of contingencies. But you can remove them in steps, Jeffrey. And if you run out of time, if something's going on where you're still investigating something, or the lender has let you know there's a 2-day delay, be communicating with that agent. They like to hear about it before they discover it first. So be communicating with the other side, and you can ask for an extension, but be communicating with the other side. But I can personally go over the form with you, and we can do it in another class. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Let me see. Well, Okay, so Anna's, okay, so thank you, Anna. So she says if they're gonna waive the home warranty, we do not check the box on the form. They must complete CBGRE form to waive the home warranty that is on our website. Thank you for letting me know that. You can do both, but if we are requiring that form from CBGR be complete, please make sure you're doing that. And you're waiving it properly per the company guidelines. Thank you so much, Anna, for pointing that out. I really appreciate it. Are there any other questions?
I know that, you know, there's some of us that are new in this industry. It would be nice to have these forms when you're going through.
Yeah, I have them in my.
I haven't finished my question. What I would like to see is have it partially completed, even though nothing's, some of them, it would be nice to see that.
Okay. Okay, gotcha.
And I will listen to this recording again, because it's a lot to take in, being, you know, that I'm gonna be working on something soon.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm also gonna be helping somebody else find something too on the lot. So I'm gonna need a lot of help. Luckily, Ruben has been very helpful with me on something that I'm working on.
Okay.
But it's a lot to take in, especially when you've never done it, but it would be nice to see it partially completed.
Okay, so what one of the people that's attending live is saying that they would like to see the offer completed next time. That's fine, I can do that. Or we can run a class where you come in here, bring your blank offer and we complete it together. Sometimes I think that doing it yourself and completion in a class is going to make it stick a lot better. So we could certainly yeah, and Irma agrees. So what we'll do is we'll schedule a class. We'll have a bunch of blank contracts printed and we will write the offer together. I think, thank you, Irma. That's a really good point. So are there any other questions that I can answer?
And Michelle, I just want to tell you, I know you know this very well, like the back of your hand, but being new, it's a lot of information to take in. And I understand we're like in a rush time, you know, but it's
Yes.
I'm gonna listen to it like I'm gonna know this like I know solar and the industry of conservation.
Okay, so Irma is saying when you're new to the business, even though we're cutting into 4 training sessions for the RPA, that it's a lot to take in. I agree. And when we've been in the business long, maybe we move quickly or we make assumptions that people know, but we will have a class where if you want to show up in person, we will write an offer together and we'll go through it. And we'll go through a bunch of different scenarios so that you're not confused. Okay. Because that's some really good points. Sometimes being 20 plus years in the business, you know, maybe I'm moving a little quick and I want to make sure everybody understands. So I just wanted to go through really quick confirmation of agency relationships. If the number 1 isn't filled out properly, this is the form you would use to correct that. I'm just going to scroll through really quick, just because sometimes we've never looked at these forms. So if you do a increased deposit, this is the DID form I was talking about. Okay, so these are just quickly rolling through. This is the FHA VA a mandatory clause. This is required. So make sure if you're representing an FHA or VA client that you fill this out. You have to put the purchase price here, fill out the top. Okay, so I'm just rolling through quick in case you've never seen it. Now, for your protection, get a home inspection. Only this is required for FHA transactions. Okay. And we can have another class and go through all the disclosures, which is what we did last time. But I'm just highlighting a few things that I think are important to know right now. See here, they added section 1. So you can check that for the section 1 and you attach the termite report, okay, or section 2. Now down here is what I was talking about where FHA or VA lender required repairs can be specified down here. Okay. So we can go over these forms in more detail, but I just wanted to briefly bring them up. Here's your contingency removal form, Jeffrey. We'll go over that in more detail, but you can remove in steps or you can remove all of the contingencies at once. Very important when you're removing contingencies that you understand and make sure that it is all clear, systems go, that you can do that. Make sure everything's complete. Be in contact with your lender before you do any contingency removal on loan or appraisal. Okay, so are there any questions or further comments?
Oh, I have many, but I have to go.
Thank you. Anybody? Oh, thank you, Brian. So Brian says, memorize the contracts and ask the trainer for more clarification. And you'll create value for everyone you'll do business with. Yes, that's great. That's a great point. Thank you, Brian. So if there's no further questions, oh, thank you, Anna. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you all. And like I said, you're never alone at Coldwell Banker George Realty. We're here to support you, make those deals happen, and get you through the contract if you have any questions. I appreciate you all. It's my great honor. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Michelle,
Yes.
question, okay, for section 1,